teacher evaluation, old versus new?
Go for it.
I can email you all something.
Thank you.
And I'm asking Ms. Lebowski and Mr. Catholico.
We have a brief PowerPoint we figured we needed to encapsulate. Something will turn on eventually. Or I can just show it. It'll turn on, there we go. So we had prepared a PowerPoint. There we go. We have a large mandate in front of us, with this new teacher evaluation. We wanted to talk a little bit, because I know there have been questions about the old system we had versus the new system and the impact it has on the district. And the impact on the district will be profound in time and in effort, teacher time, administration time, and time taken up just compiling data. So to help you understand that, Sue and I put together a quick PowerPoint. I will email it out to you so that you can have it. I know there were questions about, well, what's different? You know, we just did this new system in 2010. Last year there was the Ed Reform Bill. The state said this is the way every school system in the state must evaluate their teachers. So from the 2010 model, we have increased performance levels from 2 to 4. There is an increased number of required contacts between your evaluator and the teacher, so the principals and the supervisors with the teachers more, the intent being the more contact with your instructional leaders that will help teachers grow. Yep, that's fine. Obviously increased reporting requirements. There's more defined student growth component, so student achievement has now become a very large portion of a teacher's evaluation. So every teacher in every class needs to demonstrate student growth. And there is also the addition of a whole school student learning indicator, which is multiple components that are both in the administrator goal for their 45%, it counts as 45%, 5% in the student goal, and of course the family engagement component. And you know, as Cheryl had alluded to, we're very fortunate in this community that the community and the families do want to be engaged in the school system. So we'll always be looking for ways to increase that on a district level, obviously, but also on a school level. There are more goals and more details, and finally, Big Brother Bloom Board, which is this massive data system that the state has selected, where everything, every chunk of data, every piece, every eval gets put into that by principals. Teachers will keep track of their own professional development. And so what we have is we've integrated these components. We have on this, if you'll push, what you have up here, these are based on student outcomes. So you have your student growth and development, and then you also have your whole school learning indicator, and then we have teacher practice. That's the good old-fashioned observation plus the family engagement piece. So this is how all the teachers are going to be measured by this integrated rubric-based evaluation process. So what will teachers be graded on? There you go. This is the Common Core of teaching. We've all lived it. We all know it. The state has adopted that as the official rating piece for all teachers. Got classroom environment, planning, instruction, assessment. You have what is called professional responsibilities. Each one of those domains and each one of those subsections has been blown out into a rubric, which is literally 21 pages long. Every principal will have that. When they go into the classroom, that's what they're rating the teacher on. Part of the reason that you need to have the multiple contacts is because you're not going to see every one of these domains all the time you're in the classroom. So you may go in for a formal observation, you might talk to the teacher about planning in your pre-con, and you may watch their instruction, but you may not see them assess learning. So it's these multiple contacts and have to cover all of these domains. And then the administrator has to take a preponderance of evidence and assign a number to each one of those, from 4 being exemplary to 1 being below standard. So you can see that it's gone from what used to be this very holistic approach where the principal or the supervisor would go into the classroom, script the lesson, and sort of provide a view from 36,000 feet on how you're doing to, well, you know, did you really create a positive learning environment? You know, did you really implement instructional content for learning? So it's become very, very specific. So this is going to significantly increase the time that administrators and teachers are going to be spending on this evaluation piece. So the timeline. This is the timeline in our educator evaluation and development plan that was recently approved by the state. You can see it has become very paperwork intensive. So filling out paperwork, tracking the paperwork, filing the paperwork, documenting the paperwork. So this gives you an idea of what's going on. You've got your goal setting, all these goals, the various forms. This is a timeline for your average, everyday teacher who's doing their job. This is like what they're going to go through. These are the teachers who are educating the kids, getting the job done, planning, teacher leaders in the school, maybe on a lot of committees. All right? So this is, you can see what you have to do between November and June. Now, non-tenured teachers, which is the next timeline I'm going to show you, they obviously should require more contacts, more time, more, you know, back and forth with their supervisor, with their mentor teachers. So now you have 3 formals and an informal, so now you've increased that time. And a lot of this does stay the same. Where it becomes more intensive is in the amount of formal evaluations, and then they add this informal, and that's optional after year 2. But if a teacher needs a little extra help, you're going to keep that in. All right, so the contacts have really increased. Now, we take all of that, what a teacher does in the classroom, and we're going to assign a number to them. So all they do in the classroom is assign a number. We talked about teacher practice, observation, and family engagement. We talked about student outcomes, which is the student achievement piece and the whole school learning indicator. They're assigned numbers, preponderance of evidence. If they get an exemplary and student outcomes and a proficient under teacher practice, they're rated proficient. So all of this is put into Bloom Board, and all of this data is cranked out. Oh, excellent, thank you. So that gives you a very summarized look at this. I did 2 two-hour sessions of professional development on this with elementary and middle school and high school, and it literally took almost 2 hours when you get into the specifics of it. So we have old versus new. 2010, actually Sue and I were on the teacher evaluation committee. We developed what we thought was a very elegant, very sleek, very effective, very efficient plan. And what Sue and I did is we tried to assign times to things, just to give you a real, you know, sort of bottom line. Look at this. Here's what happened on our old eval, and it took about a total time of 4 hours per teacher, roughly, give or take. 2013, again, all of these, this is for our tenured teachers. We can see that it's literally twice the time.
And that's minimum.
And that's minimum. These are just very minimum times. We, you know, based it on, you know, my experience in the classroom, Sue's experience as a site administrator, and what we felt were reasonable or minimum times. So you can literally see for your good old tenured teacher who's doing their job, it's going to take twice the amount of time to do all the evaluation piece. For non-tenured, it turns out about the same. You can see there's more time because there's more contacts, and it's a little less than half the time per teacher. So you can see there is a significant time difference, which we're going to have to figure out how to evaluate all of these teachers. And actually, Sue is going to talk to that piece. What we have here, I'll just sort of start this and then Sue jump in. Sue put together, we collected a lot of data, and Sue put together this grid on the amount of teachers at each school and the probable amount of time, total time for each of the administrators to evaluate their schools. So I'll pass it off to Sue.
Okay, so if you take your, and I know it's a lot of information, so it might seem a little crazy to look at first, but for detailed people, okay, the number of total evaluations that principals would have to do are listed under the totals, as well as the amount of hours that it would take. Now you have to remember that we only have 180 days, and so we only have contact hours of 945 hours a year. So if you're looking at these numbers, you're looking at over a third of the time for principals simply to do evaluations. That's not PPTs, that's not 504s, that's not crisis management, that's not building a community, that's not doing any of the goals that Cheryl talked about, working with parents, working with community members, really making sure that we are building a rapport with our students. I think at elementary we've been very, very successful at looking at and providing a foundation for our children so that we do have a relationship and that they really are ready for the middle school. They feel good about themselves. You know, there's so many different things that are coming down the pike for these kids. If you look at, and Cheryl's talking about all the technology pieces and social media and cyberbullying and all those other programs, those wonderful community programs that we have, we've been able to offer and coordinate at our sites. So if principals are busy doing evaluations, and this is a minimum amount of time, literally they could probably with this new system spend half their time just doing evaluations. Now I know evaluations are important, but they're just a slice of the pie. And we need to make sure that we do have those connections with our students, that we have those emotional, social connections, that it's not just, I'm making sure that I filled out my paperwork so that I can put it into Bloomboard and I can have that database filled out. I don't think that's why we got into education. I don't think that's what parents and students are looking for when they send their children to us. Yes, certainly academic challenge, but like I said, I think this is only one piece of the pie. So given what we have right now, elementary principals would be responsible for all of these folks, okay? And T is for tenured, N is for non-tenured. And at different sites, that's why there's different times. It's not uniform throughout. There would be a different amount of hours, depending on how many non-tenured teachers they have at their particular site. Torringford has to have an assistant principal. That assistant principal, because there are so many evaluations, would not just be able to stay at Torringford and do a variety of different evaluations. They would also have to go to Boga-Wetmore. Boga-Wetmore staff has a number of programs that they service the students with. So we do have to have someone go over there as well. So they have to share the wealth. So Chuck Byer would have to go and do 6 evaluations. In addition, with my new position, I am able to take on the literacy team, which means the reading language arts consultants, the literacy coaches, all the literacy teams at elementary, the LMS library media specialist, and also the early childhood educator, and I forgot the new math lead teacher. Corbin Kennison retired, and we are filling that position, and we have those funds, and so that will happen as well. So actually, this total of 240 hours will be increased. And then we still have our special ed director, thank goodness. She will take on the speech and the psychologist. And when we go into the next evaluation grid, and this is for secondary, she also takes on a number of other folks. She ends up taking on 24 people, which is a total of 234 hours. At the secondary level, under the current model, it would be 295 hours, which is a lot of hours, especially as we are really looking at a whole restructuring in terms of making sure that we have that whole system out there. We have our assistant principals out there. We have our secretaries available to parents. We have our counselors and our special ed staff available at the different grade levels. So we want to make sure, once again, that you're looking at all the aspects, not just the academic, the social, emotional, all of those pieces, and really making sure that everybody is differentiated. We're talking about these Common Core standards and really getting our students to think more deeply, to really look critically, to initiate students initiating their own learning, especially at these levels, when you're asking questions about the rubric. I think that was a good question. And ultimately, it'd be really nice to have the kids take part in developing their own rubric for the projects that they're doing, obviously with adult help, but to really have them be a part of the expectations so that they own some of that. But that's for another discussion. I think if we have more and more of those adults working with students on that more intimate basis, it's easier to do. With this system, that would be very, very good. We do have the CIATs at the secondary level. They, similar to my totals, they will have a total of 22 and 24 respectively. And the different hours they would have to take on. Director of guidance will be taking on nurses, guidance, social workers. So that's a big piece. And making sure that those folks are on track with all the state mandates as well. That would be 200 hours. And our director of secondary ed, half of his staff that he evaluates is non-tenure, half is tenure, and so he would be up to 150 hours with references.
And that doesn't include evaluation for non-certified faculty.
Right, so
Right.
that doesn't include para, secretaries, custodians, any of those. Right. So that's the current model, so we're on the next. Okay, so what we are now doing, because now we have even more mandates. We have Common Core, and we have the new mandates with the T-VAL, but we also have new mandates from the state, like it or not, okay? So if you don't like it, please let your state reps know. And if you have any connections, that's fabulous. But in the meantime, we as educators have to live up to what these mandates are. And those mandates are making sure we have school safety committees, health and wellness policies and plans, school climate committees, making sure that we are addressing all of these issues. So all of those programs need to be rolled out. And as many community agencies as we have already, I think Chris's question is a good one. What else are we adding in this next year? And how do we keep track of that and the effectiveness of that and making sure that our students are well-rounded, feel supported, and are feeling and have a sense of well-being. So this person would do a lot of managing those programs K-5, and then be working with the Director of Secondary Education so that we could roll out K-12. Management of the 504s, interventions and accommodations. More and more, we have more 504s than we've ever had before. We have more RTI interventions. I'll hold back to that in just a minute. But more needs than ever before. So we're really talking about a variety of different community service organizations like Discovery, Susan Anthony, Berkeley Memorial, Charlotte Hungerford, and expanding those services. Making sure that there is somebody available for crisis management. I can tell you there was never a day at Forbes, or really in the 15 years as an administrator, that I was ever bored. I was always running from one thing to another. I mean, that's a good thing, I suppose, in the job, but also, you know, could I have used two of me? Yes. And I'm sure many of the elementary principals feel the same. So to have these proposed positions, which really target more of the elementary needs and making sure that we really are meeting the needs of students in all these ways, but also to evaluate the staff that are related now to all of these programs is really essential. The supervisor of educational services for support and intervention, that's someone who will oversee pre-K through 2, because our pre-K programs have expanded, gotten larger, we've needed more, a lot more needs, a lot more mandates for students coming to us, a lot more expectations for those students coming to us at the kindergarten level. Making sure that we are servicing our ELL students, our English as a second language students. Managing that Voices program, very important. A lot of these programs that you'll see on either side help prevent students from being outplaced, which ends up costing the district a lot of money. So if we have these pieces in place, we really will be able to do a good job at that.
Now, as we have, sorry, excuse me, Susan, but as we've kept more students requiring support services in district, we've had to either expand or develop new programs, which then makes for more teachers, more paras, more support service people that have to be evaluated.
Right. And we just can't run fast enough, and that's the hard part. So then at the very bottom line is once again to have manage and evaluate all of that related staff to all those programs, just like Cheryl was saying. So what might this look like? And we have checked with Danielle, we do have the funding for both of these positions. So we would be very, very happy if we could look at a different kind of proposed model, where instead of Torringford having to do 361 hours of evaluation, they would have 203. Vogel Wetmore at 176. Remember, these numbers are double what we did last year. Double. Okay? So to go from this to then going to this, it's just not even physically humanly possible, honestly. Just from an administrator's perspective. And then Forbes would go from 209 to 300, 177 to 243, and Southwest from 187 to 335. And at the middle school, high school, there would be some overlap because the director of support and, supervisor for interventions would take on some of the ELL programs. So they would even have less, which would be nice. And then just a reminder, I know you know, but the administrative duties and the things that principals, administrators have to do, I know sometimes it may seem like bonbons come at 2 and we have the pedicures at 3 or whatever. That's never been my experience. Maybe it's somewhere, but maybe, you know, in a different district or a different world, different reality. But there's PPTs, RTIs, 504s, parent meetings, school events, staff meetings, communications, community meetings, discipline, safety, wellness, school climate, health, news for schools, curriculum, district meetings, budget, PLCs, facilities, emergencies of the day. Never ever did my day go the way I had it on my little sheet. Ever, 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 ever. So that's 15 years times, 180 at least. And once again, as Cheryl said, these numbers don't include secretary, custodial, paraprofessional evaluation. So, for those of you who like numbers and really want to see what that looks like as we break it out, you're really going to want to look at this column, okay? Because as you break it out, this is how that number came to be. This is the number of tenured, this is the number of non-tenured, and this is the total number of hours, based on the grid that Joe gave us before. So if you're talking about 8 hours for the tenured, and that's at a minimum, and you're talking about 13.9 for non-tenured, then you have this all broken down, with a range of 171 to 209 hours, which is much more doable. Remembering that this is at a minimum. That's not saying that the teacher doesn't say, oh, you know what, that was a terrible observation. You know, I was really, I had 102 fever and my mother was sick and blah, blah, blah. And it was just, I know it's a snapshot in time, but could you come in again? Or I really want to learn and grow on this strategy that we talked about. So could you do another observation? You still have to go through the whole entire process. Every time you have a contact, if I meet with Joe and I do an observation, then I've got to write that into Bloomboard. All of that has to be documented. So once again, you start that process all over again. If you have somebody who's on intensive supervision, you follow a more of a non-tenured type of structure. You're in there constantly because you want to make sure that this person learns and grows. So, do we have another slide?
Secondary.
Okay, so this is the secondary. Once again, I'm just going to guide you to this column here, okay, to look at the difference in the numbers, okay? And when you have a chance to go back, I know some of you are really numbers people and you really like to, go through and you'd like to know how it occurred, okay, or where all these numbers came from. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me, give me a call. My extension is 1655, okay, and I'd be more than happy to go over it with you. Okay, the next one. So, the rationale for these positions, and I know that I've alluded to some of these things before, but huge, huge, huge. We want to make sure that our kids feel safe. We want to make sure that the incident of kids committing suicide at younger and younger ages from cyberbullying is horrifying. So we want to make sure that we have anti-bullying initiatives, and we have the tolerance building and the life skills and the coping skills, all those other pieces, that we have wellness, that we have safety, for everybody, students, staff, all of those pieces. The RTI we're mandated. We have to make sure that we are having our initiatives be consistent K through 12, as well as our 504. These are mandated. And RTI, we have to have that documentation. That child ever goes to special ed, we have to have all that background. That takes numerous
You have to
hours.
show every intervention that you provided, how long you provided it, and if it was successful.
Absolutely. So it provides consistency for our programs document and the documentation K through 12. And we still need to kind of tweak that paperwork to make it a lot easier than what we have at this point. So the big piece is that we will be able to complete the teacher evaluation with fidelity and with professional understanding of the new procedures. This is new to all of us. Okay, so as we are going through, it's going to probably take us longer because we're going to keep looking at that grid that you saw. We've all been tested, and we're moving on with it, but it's unfamiliar to us. So it will take us even longer than those numbers that I showed you that were probably a streamline of, okay, now I've got this and I've digested this and I can really use it and feel comfortable with it. But then also making sure that we are looking at staff, we're talking with staff, we're having meaningful conversations, and that's going to increase student achievement. That's the bottom line. So if we really have that time to interact with staff and have those meaningful conversations, it will make a huge difference. It'll make a huge difference for our kids, because that's, yes, the academics, bottom line, that's the most important. We want all these other pieces as well, because if a child feels good and is feeling good about themselves and confident, yes, then they're much more present and they're ready to learn each and every day. So it makes a difference as well. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. It's new to all of us, so please, if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask either one of us.
We participate in almost weekly phone call and conferences with the state
Yes.
to keep us updated on how things are changing or when it'll be implemented, or so they're just like maybe 2 steps ahead of us.
Yeah, they're learning too. And they learn from our questions. Yep.
Just a question on the student outcomes portion. Is there going to be benchmark assessments and whatnot tied to the standards so you can show growth as opposed to just a standardized test, but actually being able to determine whether they're kind of needs improvement, proficient with the standard, or kind of advanced with the standard going into the grade level midway through the year, end of the year, that type of thing? Because, like, for example, I taught 2nd grade in a previous life, but I'd have kids going to like a kindergarten grade level. Well, if you can get them up to 2nd grade, they're still going in the 3rd grade behind, but you showed 2 years of growth with that student in terms of like reading comprehension and whatnot.
Right. So we will be using a growth model. The principals are using a growth model in terms of making sure they're saying to the teachers, this is what I'm going to be looking for, from here to here. Because you're right, sometimes you have students that aren't at grade level when they start, but they make huge growth. So that's still a part of our gains, if you will. So that will be it'll be designated on report cards. We're gonna also have to realign the report cards, to tell you the honest to God truth too. Because you know what, with the Common Core and everything else, that's a whole nother piece. And so we're gonna have to move towards standard-based report cards. So it makes sense to parents do that whole parent piece that people were asking about before. That's gotta be integrated too. But we're kind of, we're running while we're, you're building the plane while you're flying it at this point.
On the elementary level, though, for 2 years now, we've had it longer than that, but now we have a whole system where we can take a look at specific assessments that are not they're standardized, but they're not.
Like a DRA?
Yeah, like the DRA too. Okay, we already do that with children in DRP and writing. So we're already mapping that phonological awareness.
But it's a really good question, because we really need to have that extend into the secondary, and we haven't had it at the secondary level. And we need to expand what we have as far as for our teachers and getting in even deeper, even at the elementary level.
And I don't intend for anything I say to trigger a lot of response.
first of all, thank you for pointing out this takes teacher time as well as administrator time. The point I would like to make, though, is that administrators get paid for that. That's what their job is. Everything a teacher has to spend time doing comes away from kids and anything that's going to benefit kids. Which isn't to say that administrators don't benefit kids, but it's indirect as opposed to that contact time that teachers do. Amazing that building administrators couldn't tell who their good teachers were and who their bad teachers were 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago. To say that we need to work on our state legislators is true, but sort of disingenuous, because if you watch CTN, they carry all those hearings. Every one of our professional organizations, teachers, administrators, superintendents, principals, whatever, they're all sitting there, yes, I, Socrates, it is so, instead of telling these people that this is too much of a burden and won't help, it will in fact hinder. So we need to work not only on legislators, but also on the professional organizations that we're involved in. Thank you.
A few comments and a question, actually, I'll leave with the question. Do the administrators fill in information for the whole board?
Everyone
Yes.
does.
The teachers do and the administrators do. It's a great question.
So this is not something that down the line we're going to hear the need for increased secretarial support to do.
Not to do that.
Not to do that.
No.
Okay, I'm just,
Not
because
on
that sounded like a lot of paperwork, and if there's,
Right.
that's being delegated to someone else, that's going to have trickle-down effects, so I'm just wondering about that. Okay.
Right.
Under best case scenario, if I'm understanding you correctly, even with the addition of these proposed positions, we're still looking at a 10 to 20% increase in administrator time doing evaluations.
Yes.
Easily.
Yeah, easily.
Yeah.
So that's best case scenario.
Best
Right.
case scenario.
Right.
But you
With
have to
everything
keep
going
in mind,
perfectly.
most of the actual observations and discussions with the teacher, yes, it can happen before and after school, but the observations have to happen during the school day. And all the write-up and prep and everything else happens, nights and weekends.
And what I think I'm understanding is the feedback that's given needs to be very meticulously documented, so there's not so much this meet the teacher's lounge conversation or come to my office afterwards.
Right.
Every single contact needs to be.
Right. And just to pull off on that just a little bit more, Chris, it's so much more evidence-based. When we went through the seed training, because all the administrators did, it's the actual conversation that you're putting in as evidence. Mr. Campolito sat with a group of students, and then he said, and then, so the student number one said blah, 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 and it's back and forth and back and forth. And the student was able to play blah, 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 blah. It's evidence, so you have to keep doing that. I mean, it's very intense. It's scripted, so many of you who have done scripting before understand that you're writing down everything that, or you're typing in everything that happened. But then you're sorting through that and you're pulling out these pieces to say, this shows me on that other huge rubric that you had rapport with the students. This shows me that you folded back to that objective that you had for this lesson, this, which was 4A and 2B, and so it's a lot to pull together.
It has to be objective, it cannot be subjective.
Right.
And so you're scripting and checking simultaneously.
Right. So you're not saying she was, the teacher was very nice to the students and gave them compliments.
You may have to count how many, I'm sorry, but like how many students are engaged at a specific time and note the time.
And do what with the information, though, I guess is the next step.
That's what, then you bring it before put it on the rubric.
And the state does what with that information?
You're collecting it all.
To
And I
do
have to-
what? I mean, I'm not trying to get
Making
hostile
sure
with you,
that-
but
To
what?
fill shelves like you see behind
Well, the other side of it, though, I understand the frustration. But the other side of it is you really want to be able to sit with that teacher afterward and say, it seems like you have a really nice rapport with your students because They were able to take risks, they played blah, 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 which was very challenging, and then they did da, 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 da. So there's much more feedback, because I think teachers also felt very frustrated where it was like, you know, you came in and you said, okay, it was a good lesson, excellent rapport with the students, everybody participated. It was too general before. So I don't know, maybe it's the other extreme, but somewhere maybe we have.
I just worry that
That'd be
this is gonna have backlash, that veteran teachers who are good teachers are just
Right.
gonna say, the hell with this. And then we're gonna have a whole bunch of non-tenured teachers come in, which requires 13 and a half hours per
Right.
teacher.
Right.
And then it just then spirals more out of control, and you lose veteran teachers to
Yeah.
reporting information.
I think that was our feeling before we went to the training. What we basically told teachers is exemplary, you'd have to walk on water every day to become exemplary. Just because it's so student initiated and the students are asking the questions and they're leading the learning and they're writing the rubrics and that's basically what the state is pushing for, okay? So what we've said is proficient isn't like proficient in CMT. Proficient's gotten a bad rap over the last few years, if you will, because it was just proficient. But really, these are your accomplished teachers. So most of us on a good day would be in this range, okay? Because even if you get a proficient and you get an exemplary, yeah, you might get an exemplary, but when you look at that rubric and those pieces, seriously, it's the walk on water. I mean, I'd love to be there, but I can't tell you on any given day. There's a few teachers that I can really think of off the top of my head who would be that, but wouldn't be that every day.
But I could easily see someone, a veteran teacher, not really caring at all about the rating, caring much more about the students, doing a good job, but caring a lot about the amount of time that has to now be taken away from the classroom, to John's point, and just saying, I have my time in, I'm leaving.
Yep.
And then we have to now, more time devoted to a younger, I'll just be curious, I hope that we can track the amount of staff that we lose as a result of implementing this over the next couple of years.
I think that's the fear with all the mandates, Chris, that are coming down.
But they
from the
get
state.
they get progressively more and more time consuming and stringent, and
Agreed.
a good teacher that was a good teacher 20 years ago is probably still a good teacher now.
And is saying, you know what, I don't want to deal with all of this, so it's my time to, you know, because I used to be able to sit with my children and really be able to, I hear that argument too. I understand. But these are all the things that they're gonna have to get evaluated on. These are all the different pieces that we have to provide evidence for. Yep.
A couple of points. Number one, I wholeheartedly agree with John. Once again, after many years in the Board of Education, going through No Child Left Behind, I think it's naive to say, why doesn't the Board of Education push back on our excuse me, on our representatives to make a more efficient process here. Whenever I brought up a proposal for this board to direct this administration to work collaboratively with other administrations or other boards of education to push back on the state, I got no traction. Nobody wanted to hear about it. Nobody wanted to do anything. Nobody wanted to raise any issues. And now we have our own central office administrators telling us that what we've got here is a huge monstrosity of an evaluation system that will almost, number one, guarantee that it's gonna cost us a lot more money, and number two, we have no real evidence that any of this is really gonna have an effective outcome, and there may be deleterious effects, as Chris says, that offset any gains that we get. We are right back where I started 10 years ago, and people in this room have experienced my frustration, and this at every step of the way. In these discussions, I just keep reinforcing the idea that I've been to the rodeo before. I've seen this all play out before. And I cannot tell you how discouraging it is to see this dressed up, to see yet another entirely new, shiny object from the state dressed up in new clothes coming down the pike that we are all dancing to and marching and saluting. And I just find it extremely difficult. We talk about, we'll bring this up when we discuss what it is to censure a Board of Education member. I will have a lot to say about that. What I want to say about this right now is the new positions. I want a real clear idea. What are we talking about new positions to do this? We're talking about these two positions here? We're talking about adding these two positions? Okay. So now let's go to process. I want to be real clear about the process and content when I talk, because apparently that gets rolled into into other people's eyes and it gets confusing. The process. This was known, this has been on the tracks. This has been on the rails for how many years? 2 years, at least 2 years now? 3 years?
Not the teacher eval.
Well, how long has that been on the tracks?
That's last year.
Okay, so you've had a year. Why wasn't this incorporated? Why wasn't this taken into account, vetted, and worked on, and show up in our last budget?
We did not have training on this until this summer.
Not have training.
The explanation of they didn't put the full explanation of it out until after July 1st.
When did they put a partial explanation? For the record, for the record, for the record.
There really wasn't anything. They bounced
talking
back and forth over the last
administrators?
2 years
Mhm.
between Danielson and Common Core and a bunch of different, there was no formulated something from the state really until, like Ken was saying, till the summer, this past summer.
Final version. Was there any initial version like this?
Pilots
I mean,
last year.
Excuse me?
Pilots last
But
year.
you had to be selected. We applied, we were not selected. The only two schools, or school districts in the area were Litchfield and Region 6, and they were together.
And they couldn't send a PowerPoint presentation, something like this, that here's what's coming down the pipe,
But that was
something
a
like
very
this?
different document.
Right.
Just Paul, the state was mandating, at that time, they were mandating every single teacher be evaluated with 6 evaluations, plus a pre-conference, plus a goal setting, plus a mid-year, plus an end of the year. And at that
When was
point,
that?
like Ken was saying, that was 30 hours per person.
There was this version, there was no version of
There
this
was no
prior to
version of
July.
this. No. There
The
was
state education committee did not send this out until, or even an early version for schools to work with?
No, when we talked to Stefan Pryor on Monday, I have to tell you that districts like Richfield, Greenwich, New Hartford, New Fairfield called in, and they were just pulling their hair out, saying, you know, what are we supposed to do with our special ed? What do you mean? Are we gonna have an evaluation system? How are we gonna monitor these kids this year? What's happening with the testing? And the state keeps telling us, well, we'll get back to you. I mean, I was physically there in Cheryl's office, and this has been a series of meetings, phone conferences over the last month. And the state is just like a step ahead.
Paul, I would also add, we're actually ahead of a lot of districts where we are right now with what we've done. Because when I started in July, we got this approved at that point with some minor changes. Some districts, you know, as Sue and Cheryl alluded to, are still trying to figure out what to do with their service people, how to take care of their PPS people. So, you know.
In fact, our PPS people, under Dr. Robin, actually designed how special ed people should, you know, a rubric for how they can be evaluated. And we're working on one for ELL. So we're actually trying to provide things to the state so that it's to our benefit. Our evaluation that was in place last year needed few changes to come up to what they're calling the C model. Many districts, because theirs did not get approved, have to use strictly the state model.
The times that I see here for doing these evals, who established those times? Are those your estimates?
Assuming that I do. We
Okay,
estimated those.
so you're telling us it's gonna take that long?
Yes.
If this were private sector said, fine, I think this is a great plan, you're gonna have to do it in 60% of that time. What would you guys do?
We would have given you the maximum number of hours then. I give the minimum number of hours that it would take, just to give you a quick and dirty of it. But the map, then, if you were saying we're gonna cut it anyway, I would have told you, you know what, realistically, we are gonna have at least 4 evaluations for non-tenured, at least 4 evaluation or observations, 4 intensive supervision, and I would have done those numbers differently. And then what you really would have seen is that it will take half the time that the administrator has in those 945 hours that they have in a year.
And that doesn't include the write-ups and putting the information in Blue Board. That's just live contact time.
It doesn't include all the non-certified staff.
To
as well.
get to your point, I think, these two positions were what we talked about last month. The administration is not asking us as a board to add these two positions right now. What we said was, in doing this evaluation process, we're most likely going to need added administrators. So as far as for tonight's discussion, these are just a brief description of what two positions the administration would love to see, and this is the job description they would have. At this point, it still has to go to personnel, it has to go to budget, it has to go, so we're not gonna take any action on those positions tonight, because that's gotta be run through the proper process. What they were doing, and unfortunately my error, is H and I really should have been after D. I got them out of order when I was doing this because I did a cut and paste error. But, these are positions related to the evaluation. In order for them to efficiently and effectively do this evaluation, they feel they would need these two additional positions. And they're gonna make a recommendation to personnel, to budget, and then run it up through the system, the way it's supposed to come up. And then we'll all have a chance to discuss it, vet it, agree, disagree, say that we don't think that we have the money, the time, the whatever. So they're kind of, they were giving those two job descriptions just in support of, all right, here's the evaluation piece. It's gonna take 400 hours. We need to cut that down to 300 hours. So we need to plug 2 more administrators in to help us cut this time down to a reasonable amount. So it's not that we're taking action on those two positions tonight. They're just to reinforce the evaluation piece.
Yeah, and plus provide some leadership on other state mandates and wellness.
Yep.
So, yep.
Can you do anything?
No, unfortunately, I'm trying to figure out exactly what the state intends to do with the data. Chris brought up the concern that's running through my head. The state never does anything without having a plan somewhere in the back of its mind. And if they're collecting this amount of data on the evaluations, my logical assumption is at some point they're going to make the money follow the data. And that scares me.
Yeah, and I do have to do
I'm not sure what you're saying. What are you saying?
If the state's gonna collect the data from every single teacher evaluation throughout every district within the community, and they have a rating system attached to it, as ECS has been flat funded for more than 6 years, it would make sense that for that amount of data to be collected, chances are somebody's thinking that eventually the money from the state will follow the rating systems. So the districts that have the most unproficient teachers will get the most state aid. The districts that have the least proficient teacher, or most proficient teachers will get the least state aid. And the ones that make the most strides will get additional benefits. It would make logical the assumption for why this is so complicated and why the state wants every teacher's evaluation to be sent up to them in electronic format that's not only quantifiable, but a way that has a rate system to it, 1 to 5. And that scares me.
Isn't it possible they're just trying to get a macro view of the administration for every school district, the central office administration, how they're
It is,
managing?
but think about in business, when we go through and your boss gives you a performance goal,
Yeah.
and they say, well, at the end of the year, if you cut your time down by 25% for what it is to create a project, there will be a $2,500 bonus for you. You're gonna try everything within your goal process to get there. Obviously, the state's setting a goal for us, or everybody. They're right now laying the groundwork. But every time we've received a grant or they've given us any type of goal, whether it was the No Child Left Behind, which failed miserably, there was always money attached to it. At this point, they're not attaching the money, they're simply collecting the ground data. My concern is that eventually the money will start to follow this. And the question becomes, what ends up happening during the evaluation process? Because now, if money's attached to the evaluation for the district, it creates a whole new challenge. So I understand why we're doing this, but I have a concern. And unfortunately, we're just going to have to see how this plays out. But in the back of my mind, I'm very curious to see what the state's final intent is with all the additional information.
I skipped over this.
That's okay. I think that was a great presentation. You guys, it was really well put together. I'm wondering, is there any money from the state for evaluation that's coming?
There's money for the Bloom Board piece. There's a
For this
little.
year.
For this year. So, but that's
We have
a
it
small piece of it. So, I mean, technically there is, I mean, but it's.
It's only gonna cost us $20,000 this year for
Yeah.
the board.
I share definitely the time and money consuming aspect to this, but I also do see, I mean, I guess we'll have to just sort of see how it plays out, but I do see a benefit to having a more comprehensive evaluation, and I do see a benefit going for an increase in number of performance levels from 2 to 4. I mean, just 2 is pass fail. I just sort of think that that's, I don't know, I think this seems a little bit more comprehensive. I share, consternation as other board members, but I still think that, this could be a good thing. Who knows?
Thank you for the opportunity to share this with you, because we've been working on it all summer. I mean, each of us a week in training to implement this.
I'm not sure when we say that the evidence is objective rather than subjective, that's necessarily going to play out. One person's spontaneous enthusiasm is someone else's out of control, and it depends who gets to write the final copy of that evaluation. But I will say, we are in very good shape as far as dealing with these state programs are concerned. With the amount of thought and planning we've put into it, we can articulate what's supposed to happen, and it seems like we will even have the people in place to make it happen. So it'll save us a lot of trouble down the